If I didn't know who your wife was going to be, I'd make an even further joke. How can you insult? Thank you to our final patrons, Strawbones and Aaron. Now, before we come to this breakdown / review of chapter 78 of 4 Nights of the Apocalypse, please leave your comments on the chapter in the comment section down below. Leave a like and subscribe if you haven't already. Also, make sure you hit that little notification bell so you miss out on any videos that come to the channel. Also, I do a Patreon down below. You can support for as low as $1 a month to get things like exclusive videos, early content, and more. Now, let's hop into last week's poll. So, last week, I ended up asking y'all a very simple question, right? There's a certain situation that we have at hand, and that situation is Big Papa Meliodas and Big Papa Arthur being here and ready to throw down. And with this throwdown being about to happen, there are obviously a couple scenarios that could occur here. And I offered you 4 options. There's Arthur wins, there's a stalemate, there's Mel wins, and there's an interruption. Now, admittedly, I low-key do regret putting in the last choice, because I figured that would be the most picked one, and shock horror, I was right. With a 41% of the vote out of 182 votes, we had interruption. The battle does not conclude. And to be fair, as much as I also want Meliodas to get up out of here, shock horror, I do agree. I don't think this battle is actually going to conclude properly. You can even kind of see it in this chapter that this battle may not conclude properly, just because, is it weird to say it feels too early? Like for either of these two powers to really be clashing? Like, it's cool that Arthur's here right now, and it's cool that Meliodas is fighting him, but at the same time, it's like, are we really gonna get rid of Meliodas this early? Like, I mean, I wouldn't be mad, but like, I would be a little bit confused on a writing standpoint, and I'd be a little bit confused on a power scaling standpoint. But who knows? It would make sense that the battle gets interrupted. 41% of y'all agree with that. Then next up in second place with 31% of the vote is Arthur wins. And yeah, this is pretty much the most logical conclusion to come to just based off the previous series coming to now. Meliodas gave up his true magic, the thing that was supposed to make him super, uber, juper, powerful, strong, leader of the entire world kind of thing. And Arthur literally got possessed by the creator of the verse. Like, it literally would make absolutely perfect sense for Arthur to just steamroll Meliodas, call it a day, and go thug walking back to Camelot. Like, it really be like that when it be like that sometimes. When you have the Chaos King versus the Lost Demon King. Makes sense. However, next up with 24% was Stalemate. And this one was interesting. I put they are the two great war powers. They can't lose. And that sort of goes back into the whole interruption idea. Like, for some reason, Arthur has waited till this moment to invade. And that reason, logically, has to be Meliodas. But at the same time, Meliodas hasn't gone out himself and hunted down Arthur. But then again, there's a arguably more optimal reason for that. It's just because, you know, the prophecy that Bartra gave. But at the same time, Meliodas is seemingly the only stopgap that's keeping Arthur from just dropping in, soloing the verse, and being done with it. Like, no offense to Bon, no offense to King, no offense to Diane, and no offense to Gother, but if you had to ask me who I would believe would be the most relevant threat after 16 years, it would be Meliodas. Main character of the last series, seemingly the highest potential of the last series. He's just a demon. And obviously he has ways to get back to his true magic level of power anyway. And if you want to take Nagaba's statement at face value, and that it's so stupid because he says Hawk Mama. He doesn't say Chaos. This is before Chaos is revealed. But when someone asks how strong is true magic Meliodas, Nakaba literally said, oh yeah, he's almost as strong as Hawk Mama. And while it sounded like a funny joke in context, if we were to take that from a straight scaling standpoint, we know Hawk Mama is Chaos. So if Meliodas were to act as that stopgap, he'd probably need to be at least around as strong as his true magic form, and that would explain why Arthur hasn't invaded yet, and the two are playing pretty much espionage games, trying to use prophecies and information and stuff like that, rather than Arthur just coming in and steamrolling, or Meliodas just steamrolling. There seem to be at an equal. So the stalemate definitely makes sense. I get why 24% of y'all went with that. Finally, with 4% of the vote, y'all really believe in Mel. Mel wins. He's the guardian of Leonis for 16 years. What's one more battle? And I can definitely see this. Mainly because, like, once again, at this point in the narrative, I feel like while I want Meliodas to die, it wouldn't make sense in the context of 4 knights. And on top of that, it would it would make sense that Arthur doesn't necessarily go all out here, specifically because of the context of him wanting to save humans. Like we literally saw in the last chapter, he's trying to brainwash all of them to come join him anyway. So if he and Meliodas were to truly have like a all-out, no-holds-barred battle, it would probably be after he's evacuated the humans that joined his side, not before. So Mel could hypothetically just sneak out a W, sneak out a sneaky win, if he somehow managed to like abuse the fact of his own location in terms of Arthur. I can definitely see that, though admittedly it's the lowest of all the options, even in my head. Which is why I say it got 4% of the vote. However, thank you so much for participating in last week's poll. I love doing these polls to get the community consensus on these different ideas and topics that we all have after these reviews. And please make sure you get your input in on tomorrow's poll, dropping at 12 p.m. to make sure your vote is included for next week's review. Now, let's hop into Chapter 78. What's up, guys? I'm the Pencil here, and here we are to review Chapter 78 of Four Knights of the Apocalypse, which is known as A King's Pride, aka... I mean, Mel really did went and go get his son. Like, he did do that in the end of the chapter. But, like, Elizabeth, come get you... Then again, like, it really depends on what Elizabeth is doing by Bartra. Like, if she can't... But then again, there's so many things we can talk about. But someone come get Tristan. That's the long story short. Someone please come get Tristan. He needs help. He needs bedtime. He needs some milk. He needs a Snickers bar, gosh darn it. You aren't you when you're hungry. Because... He's a mess. He's a mess. However, one thing I do want to talk about real quick before we hop into the chapter itself is this cover page. This is a very interesting cover page on multiple levels. One, it does show us the distinct height difference between Tristan and Meliodas. Tristan is a whole head taller than his father. Absolutely hilarious. It does make sense, though. He is his mother's kid, and obviously Elizabeth is, shockingly enough, like, seemingly 2 Meliodas is tall half the time. So it would make sense that Tristan, even at a young age, would surpass his father in height. Interestingly, though, it's cool how Meliodas, the demon, the pure demon, in fact, is the one grinning with his big old smile on his face as he's dripped out. Meanwhile, Tristan, the guy who's goddess, demon, and human hybrid, looks angry and just perturbed and mad. And it goes to show how these two characters sort of act in general to a certain degree. I'd say the interesting thing is, though, I'd say this more darker side of Tristan's personality, or this more serious side, is actually kind of less present than what would appear. Like, notably, he appeared very serious in his very first appearance. Like, when he showed up at the end of chapter, insert chapter title here, he did look extremely serious, but he seems to be a mix. He seems to be very more balanced in terms of his goofiness and his seriousness. Like, look at Tristan interacting with Melascula, and then look at Tristan in Demon Mark. Like, he has definitely multiple stages of where his personality can be, which is good. Complex character is always cool. Interestingly enough, though, it's cool to see how these branches that they're surrounded by are burnt. Like, they're just barely holding together. And even the title page itself is like, do they stand back to back out of trust or opposition? Like, these two characters, while heavily connected, obviously, they are quite literally father and son. They have some sort of... There's some sort of disconnect between them that's almost burning branches and burning bridges. I like that. I like that. It goes to show it's building up slight reasons why this may still be a problem for Tristan. And what Meliodas' own weaknesses may be as a father when it comes to dealing with his own kids, especially based off his own experience. I'm leaping so far ahead to things I want to talk about. So let me enough of the little analysis that comes from this. But another thing I do like to note is that both are kind of flanked by important animal-esque characters that are important to their respective characters. Meliodas has Hawk on his side, carved out of wood. I like how Hawk is sitting over Meliodas, obviously, and Tristan has Sin, who was Lancelot, obviously. So it still isn't like a true animal buddy, but talking animal properly correlates with the series of Four Knights would be Sin for the most part. We love Sylvain, but Sylvain isn't that important. However, what is important is the fact that the like button is free and so is the subscribe button. So I greatly appreciate if you hit both of those. But in actuality, this cover page is pretty fire. It's pretty fire. I like it. It builds into what the chapter is going to be about, and what I'm assuming, if Meliodas survives past this fight with Arthur, and Arthur doesn't, end him, I'm assuming this is what's going to lead to their dynamic for a majority of the series, until either Meliodas' death or until they develop beyond this. However, enough of that, let's hop right into the chapter itself. So we open up, and we do get to see that in response to Meliodas' declaration, like, oh, I'm going to bring you back to your senses, Arthur, Arthur actually laughs. And, like, notably, it's almost, I'm not sure, it really depends. What do you consider a crazed laugh? Like, what would you hear and be like, buddy, you take your meds today? Like legitimately, like, what makes you think of that? Because it almost seems crazed to me. Like, Arthur goes, bring me back to my senses, you say. It's because I came to my senses that I'm standing off with you like this. Like, I don't know. It's there's the constant haunting fact that you all continue to remind me about, and I thank you for this, that it really could just not be Arthur completely. Like, the sort of chaotic nature behind Arthur's kind of got me leading to the more and more into the fact that this really could just not be Arthur. Because it seems like 16 years time and some eternal reflection. I feel like that doesn't but 16 years is a really long time. Like, that's a fat chunk of people's lifespans. So, yeah, a lot can change in 16 years. That's the reason I'm still leaning towards the fact and hoping towards the fact that even if Arthur's being influenced, I would like it if this influence that Arthur's receiving from either Chaos, Cath, or anything is simply an amplification of his own base feelings. Like, maybe a pure 16 years ago Arthur, before the demons started talking to him, would not have done this. But, in actuality, in the long run, Arthur deep down really would have liked to do this, and it's sort of just chaos and Cath within him lowering his inhibitions, essentially, and just allowing him to do it. Though it's interesting how Arthur's blade looks, and, like, I'm not sure what the weapon is. I'm assuming there's some reason it's shaped like that, but, like, especially after Excalibur in all of its forms, I don't think there's a single bad-looking form of Excalibur, from its original, just human sword form, to the demon-inspired form, to its true form. I think all those are cool-looking swords. Whatever this new sword is supposed to be, I hope it's not Excalibur. I doubt it is. It has a different pommel, different shape, everything. But it just looks so weird. Like, admittedly, it does somewhat remind me of Gale Thunder's Season 1 sword, and not even just a Season 1 sword, a sword in general that had, like, two overlapping pieces of metal that spiked outwards on the ends. But what this sword loses that makes that sword cool is it lacks, like, sharpness, and it, like, even the ridges of the blade do not look sharp. They look too rounded. Like, if I were to redraw it, I would, like, sharp line it so it looks more like a blade. Meanwhile, this kind of just looks like a fancy baton, and it's not even fancy. It kind of just looks weird. Like, seriously, I don't know why Arthur decided to bring this one. I'm not sure if Arthur's wielded, once again, not a big Arthurian mythology buff, but I know Excalibur is just another name for Caliburn, and, like, people have used Excalibur as, like, an evolution of Caliburn and stuff like that, and or Caliburn and Excalibur are two different swords entirely. So I'm not exactly sure. This may be Caliburn. This may be just some other blade that Arthur has. I don't know. If you guys know anything, you recognize that symbol on the blade, because I also don't recognize that symbol, please let me know down below. Trust me, you guys educate me so much on this series that I really, really appreciate it. Thank you for all that. So if you guys know the truth, please let me know. Though it is interesting how Arthur is, despite his hatred for the other races, right? Like, that's what's implied here. Like, he absolutely despises every last one of them, and he wants humans to rule all. He still is giving Meliodas the common courtesy to stand off against them, draw his blade, and actually fight him. Because, like, reasonably, put me in Arthur's position, give me Arthur's motivations, and we're not fighting. I'm wiping your entire kingdom literally off the map. Like, I will send you into space. I have the full capability and ability to do that as the Chaos King. I created this world, literally. Well, technically there was a Demon King in Meliodas' case, but I brought you into this world and I can take you out of it, quite literally. So Arthur's a better man than me. I think, once again, I keep going back to the idea that Arthur may just happen to be possessed. I know some people aren't down for that, myself included, but if he is possessed, it is cool to see that, hypothetically, this is Arthur leaking through, right? Because remember, Arthur did have a lot of respect for the seven deadly sins, Meliodas especially, so it would make sense that Arthur, despite his goals to, eradicate the other races and get rid of them all, in his heart, and the basis of who he is, a big formative part of himself, still is Meliodas, the leader of the seven deadly sins, and one of the other races. So it's cool to see that he's refraining from really using his deific abilities just to sword fight him. I like it. And we do get to see more and more elaboration about Arthur's ideology, right? Like, Arthur's currently on a, I can't, like, the limit of jokes I can make are, it's very unclear, but I have a limit, so I won't make the jokes that I want to make here. But Arthur does clearly say here, a world where humans and other races coexist is an empty dream. I will put this world back in the hands of humankind. And Arthur, you sound like a... Okay, just know, there is a prominent... Let me explain why Arthur's just wrong here, right? The world was never meant for you. Long story short, it was meant for the giants. Like, I get it, Chaos didn't like the giants, but they made it first. They are, ironically enough, more in tune with the world itself, the planet you live on, than humans likely will ever be. Because they predate you. Like, I could see an argument that, okay, demons have no jurisdiction over the earth. Maybe they don't belong there. Goddesses have no jurisdiction over the earth. Maybe they don't belong there. Fairies have no jurisdiction over the earth. They don't belong there. Merely because the moment, maybe not the moment, but when the Demon King, the supreme deity, and the fairy tree were created, they were like, forget this, I'm making my own realm. And they all made their own realms. But the giants, they didn't have a deific figure. They just, well, actually they did. Chaos was their deific figure. So, reasonably, Arthur, humans have no right to the land. You're just being biased and mean and stupid. And it kind of reminds me of a certain group of individuals that claim rights to land that they weren't from, that they didn't belong to first, that they sort of just appeared on and now want total control over, and then get mad at the species who does belong there, wanting to stay there. I don't know, Arthur. He's not a little bit hypocritical, dog. Like, even the chaos in you should be like, okay, maybe we shouldn't belong here. Like, the humans should have gotten their own realm, ironically enough. If it was so serious, let them have their own realm. Arthur, you can make their own realm. Just leave them be. But it is it's like the internalization of Arthur's ideals here. It's just very clear. Like, there's obviously no convincing him at this point. Like, when Meliodas, the reason he laughed when Meliodas said bring him back to his senses is because he's so deep in the belief that he is right and that there is no one else who can prove him wrong, because he is quite literally the creator, that there's nothing Mel can do to stop him. And I think it goes to show how, like, deep and true this power has driven Arthur. Like, say Arthur is pure, right, as I want him to be. The idea to give a man the idea to execute any idea that he has, and he could go mad. Give someone the ability to do anything they want, and anything they want could become depraved. And we see that here with Arthur beautifully, and I like that. And we get to see that with this being the case, Tristan is like, okay, all right, obviously we cannot waste any more time. We're going to go in there. I'm going to take him on myself. And we see that Meliodas, notably, now remember this is Meliodas in base, is just stretching, cracking his bones. I mean, like, stay right there, Tristan. And just, boom, like straight gone. Like, and notably, right, there's some levels to this, right? So, base Meliodas isn't even looking at Tristan, right? He's just like, whatever. All right, stay here. He gives the order. And then Tristan, who has direct eyes on Meliodas. No, this is Demon Mark Tristan. So, likely, at least in terms of all the forms we've seen in actual combat, the highest level of raw power and thusly perception speed that he has. Like, typically, when you get stronger in Seven Deadly Sins, all your stats raise. So when Tristan is, as, let's just say, the basic Demon Mark multiplier, twice as strong than he is in his base state, then bada bing, bada boom, Tristan, in his strongest combat form, gets perception blitzed by Meliodas. Because notably, his eyes don't even track where Meliodas went. He's just that far gone, that fast. It was as if, remember when Lance perception blitzed everybody? That's what happened to Demon Mark Tristan. And speaking of Lance, this really makes me wonder what the what the gap is between Tristan and Lance now. Because we know that the gap between Meliodas and Tristan is at least a perception blitz level. Like, this is just something that happens for base Meliodas. This isn't even him stressing or anything. He's just got to the battlefield, and he's already stretching, trying to get loose, and he's able to perception blitz Tristan. So I wonder where in this gap of, like, relativity to perception blitzing is Tristan going to fall in, essentially. Not Tristan, where is Lancelot going to fall in that gap? I don't know. But what I do know is the fact that the like button is free and the subscribe button is free too. So I greatly appreciate if you hit both of those because they help me out, they help the channel out, they help the video out, they help everything out. Thank you. However, with that being the case, Lance falling somewhere within that range of speed is endlessly impressive, just based on the scaling we've gotten for Demon Mark Tristan already. So it's cool to see that, one, Meliodas is still distinctly above his son, who is distinctively above Percival and Gawain, meaning he is still relevant, even in base, which is crazy. But on top of that, it leaves more and more questions for the limits and powers of Lancelot, which I like. Lancelot, despite reasonably being a character, being one of the knights that we spent some of the most time with outside of literally Percy himself, Lancelot's still very much a mystery where he actually stands. We know he stands above. That's all we know, though. We don't know how far above. We don't know why above. But we know it's at least above enough that Demon Mark Tristan is confident that Lance could come and stop him. And Meliodas has enough trust in Lance to carry out missions, despite not being his direct bloodline like Tristan. Interesting. However, the other interesting thing is that not only does Meliodas just casually perception blitz Tristan, but Meliodas charges at Chaos Arthur in base with Lost Vein. Now, admittedly, Sacred Treasures, crazy amps. They go nutty. They go stupid. Like, if Dragon Handle with a blade welded on top can give you a 10 times amp, what the hazy do you think a Sacred Treasure can give you? You could argue that they may have the same amp, though, because, I don't know. It really depends. Like, does the hilt of Dragon Handle being made by Dabuzu, but only being a part of something Dabuzu made, like, does it lower the amp? Regardless, it's crazy to think that Meliodas in base is so confident in his level of strength that he leaped at Arthur in base. And on top of that, it's crazy to see that base Arthur here is able, well, not even able, he shows, like, concern, fear. Like, you can see it in his face. He's like, what? Like he just straight up didn't expect Meliodas to be this fast and get this close to him. And that is nutty. Now, obviously, this is base Arthur, right? Like, he has the Chaos Eyes. Who knows whatever higher levels of power he has beyond that. He's very likely suppressed, right? Sure, he has his blade out, but that's the bare minimum. But even still, for base Mel to at all impress and or throw off or shock a suppressed base Arthur, that is pretty crazy. And notably, I released a video a few months back talking about how Meliodas, once again, sort of has to be the stopgap. Like, he has to have some way, some shape or form, retrieve the power of his prime self. And by prime, I mean true magic. And I said that was very likely by training, mainly because we've seen Meliodas train up to points that he has reached previously. Like, his body does recognize how strong he was at a point, and he can very easily physically reach that point again through sheer training, reawakening, stuff like that. Like, he always can get back to that level of power one way or another. Look at Prime Mel, look at Post-Druid Mel, look at all that. Like, he can get the power back. So it's interesting to see how far base Meliodas has come, because notably, I mean, say Arthur was suppressing himself to around, like, Cath level. Base Meliodas could do that too, then. It's weird. I wonder, like, this is, once again, very nebulous. We don't know how much power Arthur's using. We don't know how much power Meliodas is using. All of it's pretty up in the air, but simply the general idea, somewhere base Mel scales to somewhere of base Chaos King Arthur. And that's a lot better than most people, myself included, honestly, a little bit, was thinking that he'd be at, which is great. I like it. It shows that Meliodas is still a proven threat, and I like that. And we get to see that Meliodas does swing Lost Vein, and with the sheer, once again, the sheer air pressure coming off the blade just annihilates a whole chunk of the stairs. Like, legitimately, he doesn't even look like he makes contact with Arthur. Like, you can literally see Arthur's, despite what it looks like in the previous shot, a few feet away from him, like at least 3 body lengths away from Meliodas, but he just releases a wind blast by swinging Lost Vein that's so devastating it annihilates the stairs. But despite that, Arthur did manage to block, and that is a little bit. I mean, it makes sense, right? I can't really say it's a little bit nutty, but still, once again, it actually is a kind of bit nutty, because that means that Arthur is so confident in Meliodas' ability to actually harm him that he's forced to block, right? Because we know in Seven Deadly Sins, if you are drastically more powerful than your opponent, their blade will literally bounce off your neck. Like, you may actually break your weapon against them. Like, remember Death Pierce against Theriere? He swung his blade at her neck, and I don't even think there was any darkness on it, and it just snapped. Remember, every single time Meliodas has been hit by something that just didn't do any damage to him, the blade broke. Remember, Anasians, when he got a Ceranos amp, he literally just sat there and face tanked something. But Arthur takes one look at this base Meliodas and is like, wait a minute, these swings may actually damage me, so let me block it with my blade. Like, he's smiling there, he's grinning, obviously, so he's not absolutely worried, but the fact that he's not just standing there and just boom, 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 letting all the blade strikes bounce off of him, goes to show you that base Meliodas has some sort of relativity to base Arthur, to where Arthur finds it necessary to guard. And notably, a thing I am wondering is, does Arthur have access to all of the previous king's fighting styles innately now? Or does he still need Excalibur for that? Because we see he's like naturally defending with his blade and one arm, but I can't tell if that's like any of the Dance of the Vita stuff like that or anything. Maybe not. I'm not sure. It's probably an Excalibur exclusive ability, but at the same time, it'd be cool if Arthur could just like hard download the data from pretty much every single being there in the blade and just be like, alright, so now I have access to all your abilities at once, just because I can. I'm the Chaos King. I created all of you indirectly anyway. Interesting. However, we do get to see that while Arthur's parrying a lot of these strikes, and they did destroy the bridge, he's just floating there. And I think that's really, really cool, right? Because freeform flight is something that gets a little bit underrated, I think, in fiction, just because it's so common. But it's great to see that Arthur, when having his foothold blown away, doesn't even mention it. He doesn't even care at all. He just immediately starts flying and contesting immediately. And that makes me wonder, like, hypothetically, if that were to happen to you, I feel like I'd stumble a little bit. Like, you have to activate your freeform flight. So I don't know. It's still just a very cool visual to see that Arthur just casually starts floating there and parrying everything still, because he's just that guy. And speaking of being just that guy, we get to see that two of Meliodas' like, I'm not sure if they're parried slashes or just slashes that happen to miss, but they swing and they annihilate a mountain. And notably, I will admit, Nakaba, between you and me, dog, like, we're gonna need to step up the destruction a little bit. Like, seriously, a mountain getting destroyed by some air slashes, like, dog, that's season 1, beginning of series, Meliodas twig level, dog. Like, really? Like, you have moons. You have a guy that can literally create separate worlds on a whim. Get a little bit bigger. Like, get a little bit more creative. Come on now, Nakaba. Like, we're still destroying mountains. It's still supposed to be hype. It's still supposed to be cool. Like, it is. I'm not gonna lie. It's cool to see only 2 slashes literally annihilate that mountain like that. Like, slice it and slash it into a bunch of miniature pieces. But at the same time, it's like, these two are obviously on a higher level than beginning of series Meliodas level. Like, they're obviously on a higher tier than even mid-series, late series. Like, these guys are monsters. So the fact that their casual slices are just tearing apart mountainsides, you could do a little bit more. I get why you don't want to do a little bit more. You obviously want to save some for later. It's still very early on in the series. But speaking of early on, we are early on in the video, so I greatly appreciate if you hit the like button and subscribe buttons, because they greatly help out the channel, they help me out, and they help the video out. So thank you. But I guess, but then again, like, really, in this series too, something happens where we get a very similar feat to this. And notably, it's even noted, I mean, it's so weird, right? Because then we get the next panel, right? Because we get to see the mountain was shattered into pieces, but then it was kind of split down the middle. But at the same time, this is Galen stuff. Like, low commandment tier level stuff. Like, oh, wow, we split a chunk of the land. Dog, we've seen it all before. I need some more sauce. Like, this is a gallon stuff. I need more juice. Just destroy the continent. Like, legitimately, just slash so hard that the planet rips in half and Arthur has to put it back together. You can do that. Luckily enough, Arthur is kind of our Dragon Balls. Like, one of the biggest reasons I say, oh, a lot of your favorite verses seem to not have high destructive capacity, mainly because they can't put their worlds back together. That's a thing that Dragon Ball doesn't have to worry about, because they can just wish everything back. Oh no, the universe is being destroyed. Don't worry about it. So Arthur, being the person who can recreate the world, have him go a little bit nutty. Let Meliodas actually destroy some stuff, because this land splitting stuff, this mountain destroying stuff, it's mid, it's water, it's booty, water, butt cheeks. Nah, it's so cool. It's so cool. Let me not even pretend like I still don't find it hype, but just in comparison to what we've seen before and what we know the level of battle that this is in terms of just raw stats, I feel like it's a low-key, a little bit underwhelming to see him just splitting mountains. It is beautifully drawn, though. Once again, Nakaba being a man with no assistants who produces a weekly manga, I don't know how he does it. I don't know why he does it. I don't know, like, his health, mentally and physically. Like, please, someone help him. Someone go help that man. He definitely needs it and deserves it. Like, God, you lookers, I don't know how you draw this week by week, but still, level it up. Level up the damage. And, like, once again, Percy is freaking out, right? Because he's like, he blew the mountain away. But Percy, you did that. Like, in the context of the story, probably about 3 days ago, you did that. You blew the mountain away. Sure, it was with Taliscar's magic, but still, this mountain being blown away is not, it's not the most impressive thing, Percy. Like, even to you, this should not be blowing you away this much. I feel like we've had this discussion before. Someone else blew away a mountain or blew away something, like blew away a chunk of a forest, I think, and Percy freaked out. And I'm like, Percy, you've done this. This isn't that crazy to see. However, it's amazing. And once again, even regardless of that, even if it does seem a bit smaller scale than what it should be, it's cool to see beings like Percy, like Gnossians, like Donnie, look on and be like, yo, this is literally just insanity. Like, this is literally a calamity given the form of two men. What is happening right now? Because reasonably, you got to think about that. What else would you really view it as? You see these two deific beings clashing in the middle of the sky and annihilating the landscape. Like, yeah, that would be kind of terrifying realistically. So it's cool to see that we have these regular human reactions of these humans that are really not regular. Like, these are still magically imbued humans, but just the raw power of the two deities that are going to war has them shaking in their boots. I love it. And I like how, once again, due to his experience with Meliodas and just the experience with battles in general, Dreyfus is like, hey, stay out of His Majesty's fight. All hands, make a retreat, and evacuate and guide the citizens. Mainly because if they could do nothing before against Meligalon, they definitely aren't doing anything against Arthur other than getting in Meliodas' way. So it makes sense that Dreyfus, someone who understands how well Meliodas works alone, would definitely understand, like, yo, we gotta get moving, we gotta get going. It's done. We can't stay here anymore. This is not our case. And it's good to see characters acknowledge that, right? Like, admittedly, I'm sad the Holy Knights are holy fodder, but it's good to see them recognize their situation here. And we get to see, as Hendrickson says, shoot, forget this, I ain't even a Holy Knight no more. I'm just gonna go dip, I'm a doctor now, I ain't doing this fighting mess no more. We get to see that Isolde is still worried about Sir Tristan, obviously, because I'm not sure if she's seen this demonic side of him before, but obviously his well-being is the top of her priority list. However, we do get to see that Tristan is just staring up at the battle going on between his father and the Chaos King. And ironically enough, upon hearing his name, maybe he doesn't even hear her. Maybe that's why. Because he at first he's standing there looking upon it without his wings. But then he immediately spawns his wings and just lunges straight at the two. Like, he just doesn't care. And notably, this was kind of foolish. It admittedly leads to a very cool shot, right? Because you get to see Arthur, who's flying freeform, and I'm assuming Meliodas, who's still just like, his wings aren't even out. So I'm assuming he's just in air through sheer willpower alone. Like, he's not on the steps, he's not on anything. So he's just clashing there with Arthur in midair, maybe using Arthur for leverage to try and keep himself in the air. And you just see Tristan diving in, Esteros and Mael at hand, ready to get to slicing. And we get to see that Meliodas immediately recognizes this and is like, yo, wait, no, you gotta stay back. And I'll admit, I grew up in a certain household that if I were, I don't know, to be fair, my father was never fighting for the sake of the kingdom, and or was I a warrior overtaken by my latent demonic genetics. But like, if there was any context, even now, that I told my father to be quiet, I think I would have been put 6 feet under. Like, literally 12 feet. I would have been 2 graves deep, gosh darn it. Like, there's no way Tristan really said, be quiet. And like, I'm trying to think. Now I think about it, this isn't necessarily uncommon for demons, right? Like, at first, when I first read this, I was like, dog, like, that has to be against your demonic programming. Like, I couldn't think of a moment where a demon felt the gap in power it had and charged in regardless. Like, seriously, there had never been a point. But when I think about it, even the highest levels of demons are kind of like extremely reckless with themselves, like to unbelievable degrees. Like, look at Galland, one of my favorite characters. Dog threw himself at Escanor. And to be fair, he didn't know Escanor had sunshine, but still, he took one look at Escanor and was like, yeah, I'm gonna fight that. He also took one look at post-Druid Meliodas and was like, yeah, I'm gonna fight that. He also took one look at pretty much anybody he ever took a look at and said, yeah, I'm gonna fight that. And Galland, he just isn't that strong, but he just didn't care. We saw Darieri lunge directly in at Esterosa, like Esterosa wasn't her fattest counter ever. So, demons, even of the highest level, can be pretty darn right. Look at Meliodas himself, when he was overridden by his demonic programming, lunged straight at the one. Did not even consider using more of his power, did not even consider anything like that, and allowed himself to get one shot. Like, demons, sometimes, despite how battle-oriented they are, I think it's to their detriment at some points. Like right now with Tristan, because he just dives into death. Like, admittedly, I can't imagine what it's like standing next to Arthur, or even being in Arthur's presence right now. Like, even if he's suppressed, the level of power that he'd have to be using to compete with Meliodas in base, just based off the previous series scaling, has got to feel immense. And this is the same Demon Mark Tristan that just got perception blitzed by his base father. So, like, the fact that the need for battle, the need for conquest, overrides Tristan's base logic to the point where his sixth sense, which should reasonably be your strongest sense, like, we know if someone is overwhelmingly more powerful than you, which we know Arthur is in this case, in comparison to Tristan, you feel the shivers and shaking of your bones because you know you're gonna die. I guess the demonic bloodlust just overpowers that and puts it to the point where you don't even follow orders. And once again, this does happen. Like, Galland, when told by Zeldris to chill out and not do anything, he looked at Zeldris, his leader, dead in the face and was like, yeah, no, and then proceeded to leave anyway. So, and then look at, once again, Monspeet and Darieri, they didn't respond to Zeldris. But you could argue, there's a different story about that. But still, even look at Zeldris to the Demon King, Meliodas to the Demon King. Obviously, demons can be quite rebellious to their authority figures and really their father figures. So it kind of makes sense that Tristan would lunge in, regardless of the circumstances, regardless of his stats, and be like, no, shut up, be quiet, I'll do it myself. However, Arthur obviously is like, oh, you're stupid, what a bad child. And immediately, like, I love how Arthur doesn't even, like, chastise Tristan. Well, I mean, he chastises him by calling him a bad child, but he doesn't even hesitate to just include him into the battle. As Tristan is just screaming and swinging both of his blades, Arthur just casually just like he's calling a cat, just casually batting away all of his strikes with much more ease. Like, notably, when Meliodas lunged in, you could see a look of shock, confusion, even a bit of despair on Arthur's face. When Tristan lunged in, he smiled. So you can tell the level of threat here is way different. And once again, it's very interesting to see Arthur holding back on the knights. There must be some reason that I don't know about for why he's doing that. Because reasonably, if I'm Arthur in this scenario, and this kid is destined to become something that's going to stop me, and it just threw itself at me, yeah, I'm annihilating it. Like, legitimately, there's nothing you can do to stop me. But there's also nothing that stops you from hitting the like button and subscribe button, because they are both free. In fact, if you're enjoying the video so far, share it with your friends. I greatly appreciate that. Helps out the channel, helps me out, and helps out a lot. Thank you guys so much for that. However, still, it's crazy to think that Arthur is just casually sparing Tristan. Like, doesn't activate Chaos Eyes, doesn't do anything, no reality warp, he just swings. And admittedly, he does critique Tristan once again as like, you shouldn't speak to your kind old father like that, and immediately go to decapitate Tristan. But considering we saw that Gelda, amped by the Demon King's blood, could just put her head back on, I'm assuming the Demon Goddess hybrid, literally the two clans with hands down the best regeneration in the verse, could probably survive a little decapitation. Sure, would it be gruesome? Yes. Would it look bad? Yes. But that's not exactly a kill shot on a demon. Like, go for the 7 hearts, if Tristan even has. I wonder how I really am interested. I may make a whole video on Tristan's hypothetical biology and like how his body functions, because it's gotta be weird. Like, I can't imagine two opposite species merging as well as they did with Tristan, but apparently they worked out pretty well. But if he does have 7 hearts, go for those. Blow his chest open or something like that. Don't just decapitate him, he'll just put it back on. However, it is cool to see that there is still some sort of logic within Tristan, right? Like, he isn't just consumed purely, because when Arthur goes to decapitate him, you see the look of fear on his face. Like, he realizes, oh no, I cannot react to this. My head's gone. And we see that Meliodas, being the best papa in the entire world, manages to, and this is, you could argue that this is not necessarily a blitz, mainly because you could argue that, oh, Meliodas just intercepted a swing that was meant for Demon Mark Tristan, and obviously there's a massive gap between the two. But if you want to argue that Arthur was not suppressing himself here, and he was really trying to decapitate Tristan with as much strength that he was at least using against Meliodas low-key kind of blitzes him, because you can see Arthur's even caught off guard as he finishes his swing through, and Tristan managed to be avoided thanks to Meliodas dragging him down. And we see that once again Arthur's just reinforcing the fact that base Meliodas can harm his base self, because he is forced to dodge out of the way of Lost Fate's swing. And then finally Meliodas decides to take the battle a little bit more seriously and activates Demon Mark. And notably, this does seem to be 3rd stage Demon Mark, which shows that Meliodas is in fact not playing any games. Like, you can see the mark takes up his entire forehead. Meanwhile, a stage 1 or a stage 2 would take up like a tiny piece or chunk. However, admittedly, he is, let me double check something. It is entirely possible that bro still is a little bit suppressed, because despite being what looks like stage 3 Demon Mark in the forehead, then again, did stage 3 Demon Mark ever have the, hold on, let me double check something again. Yeah, notably, despite how I draw it, there's no like extra mark going down his face in the original panel, which assumedly means that he isn't using his full dark power pre-assault mode, because admittedly assault mode is different. That's a higher level of power than all of his demon marks, which is very interesting on a scaling standpoint. But still, the fact that he goes into demon mark of this level is impressive. And then he immediately whips out the TD, the TD, and I ain't talking about no darn bank, because he whips out Trillion Dark. And we get to see that he wields it in a very interesting way here, right? Because he summons the darkness spears, and then once he swings his blade, they all sort of randomly go. Like, they all attack at different angles and different stuff like that. Meanwhile, previously, when he used Trillion Dark, he kind of had to direct it, 1, with his hands, and 2, they all sort of moved in unison. They were like a flowing wave of darkness. Like, that's how they were used in the combo attack against the Demon King with the Britannic body. That's how they were used in the initial reveal against the Demon King Meliodas' head. Like, usually the Trillion Dark Spears need to be guided and move in a unison group. But it goes to show you that, hey, 16 years of training has developed the technique even further. And notably, I don't know what Arthur means by this. This is a weird statement, like, ugh, this power, it's dark enough to have mass? Like, unless I'm mistaken, pretty much every single darkness user we've seen has had mass. Like, every single darkness shield, all the dark wings, everything that's not maybe like a demon mark has had mass before. It's very weird that Arthur's pointing that out. I know he's never seen the technique, like, legitimately, every single time the technique was used in the original series, Arthur was either chilling up in Hawk Mama and or chilling up in Hawk Mama, because he literally never used it against Kath or anything like that. So Arthur never got to see it, but still interesting that he says this power is dark enough to have mass. He doesn't say dense enough to have mass or this much mass, just dark enough. So like, is there levels of potency to it? Like, nah, but we know darkness can be used to physically restrain people. Like, we know what Trillion Dark is essentially Meliodas hyper condensating darkness based on what King taught him with his own usage of disaster. But I don't know. It's still just a very weird statement. Maybe the only thing I could hypothetically excuse it for is that Arthur's thinking of darkness in his own chaos sense, where darkness is sort of just an intangible part of himself. Like, it's not constantly existing, constantly having mass. So thusly, maybe he's a bit confused by that. However, we do get to see that not only does Arthur need to be forced to block all the Trillion Dark Spears, but Meliodas then immediately lunges in and kicks him downwards. And it goes to show that now Arthur is struggling to react and can't even, just barely block this Demon Mark Mel. However, the fact that he's still in base right now goes to show you how much he was holding himself back earlier. And notably, he doesn't necessarily even take any damage. Like, he lands back, but he's not scuffed, he's not injured or anything like that. So he's still just a bit different than the average human being. And we get to see that upon hitting land, he stands there. And what I love here is that Tristan, while he's taking over and just rabid for King Arthur, he's like, I'm gonna tear you apart. It's the last thing I do. I will rip you to shreds. Like, while he's completely consumed, Percy, who also obviously wants revenge against King Arthur for what he did to his grandfather, and obviously turning his father against him, and as far as Percy knows, he is still so paralyzed by fear, right? And like, we see him gritting his teeth and holding Dragonhead like he's about to do something. But it seems like even without Nasian's words of reassurance, like, hey, don't do it. He's beyond your power as is. Let's pull back for now. It seems like Percy wouldn't have had the willpower to attack. And it makes sense, right? You got to realize Percy's like, he's not fodder, but he's not Demon Mark Tristan level. And Demon Mark Tristan is fodder, at least compared to these two high tiers, if not. Like, I guess Arthur literally just would be a god tier. Like, he is the god tier. So, I guess that's the case there. But still, very, very interesting to see the fear that is induced by Arthur here over Percival. Though it does make me wonder if this has anything to do with King's Dominion. Like, maybe Tristan is able to attack once again as bloodlusted as he wants because he's mostly non-human, and since Percy is supposedly all human, he's just unable to do anything. I don't know, it's interesting. However, we do get to see that after knocking Arthur back, Meliodas is like, yo, you good? You hurt? What's wrong with you? And we get to see that Tristan, despite having the fear of death struck into him, and not 15 seconds ago when Meliodas had to save him, Tristan asks, who said you could help me? Dog. One, he's your dad. He's gonna help you regardless. Two, well, actually, no. Once again, I guess that's maybe just the demon thing in him. Like, Meliodas didn't have the best relationship with his father. To put it very lightly, he didn't have the best relationship with the Demon King. So maybe this is just like a thing, right? Like, it's not a phase, Dad. I don't need your help, even though I almost just died. Like, I guess that's the main thing here. And we get to see that due to, once again, the demonic power just running rampant in him, all of his instincts taking over, he is essentially lost it. He's losing his mind right now because he's unable to think rationally because of just the need to fight. Like, he straight up yells at his father, like, am I hurt? I'm always fighting to the death. You can't treat me like a child forever. And while I do 100% believe these are feelings that Tristan genuinely has about himself, I'm assuming a big thing of his dynamic with Meliodas will be the idea that Meliodas is treating him like he would have wanted to be treated by his dad. Like, Meliodas was pretty much from birth, as far as we know, a war machine. Like, dude was made for battle, quite literally born and made for conflict. And what else is made for conflict is that doesn't work at all. Like, those free and solo subscribe on. I greatly appreciate if you hit both of those. Thank you. However, the thing is, what Meliodas was raised and made for was battle. He is called the Destroyer for a reason. His whole dynamic with his father was most likely, you will become strong, you will lead the demon clan, you will lead the 10 commandments, you are my warrior and ward. That's about it. He never got any fatherly affection. Neither he nor Zeldris did. That's why they probably clung so closely to each other, as that was the only love and affection they could get by anyone that they were related to, because their mom was probably not in the picture, and Chandler and Cusack were not related to them. However, with that being the case, it seems like it's had the byproduct of making Tristan soft. Like, soft in terms of... It's weird to say, because technically he's acting hard right now. Like, he's serious. He's like, you can't train me like a child anymore, Dad. This isn't a phase, I promise. But due to that, it's likely that Meliodas probably didn't want Tristan to dive too deeply into battle. He was like, live a life that you can enjoy, kid. Like, you don't need to fight and fight and fight. And unfortunately, that probably backfired. The reason Tristan very likely doesn't have control over this power is because Meliodas never trained him for it. They didn't think you'd have to use it. You know, the only real living threat that they had to deal with was Arthur. But he didn't think Arthur was going to go crazy and turn on and want to slaughter the entire world. So there was no point in just training Tristan to control his power. Assumingly, like Meliodas and Zeldris had training of their power at a young age. And thusly, it leaves Tristan's really awkward position where, upon just seeing it through his demonic lens, his battle instincts, his very species is commanding, be a viable warrior, be useful in combat. But his father, who very likely raised him to do what he wanted to do, not be a battle warrior, not be so immersed in combat, is conflicting. And thusly, he's just seeing his father for what he's assuming as someone who views him as a weakling, someone who views him as a child still, someone who views him as someone who's unworthy for battle. And it's leading to this constant negative feedback cycle where he's just falling further and further and further into darkness. And soon enough, he'll be possessed by Xehanort. And, no, I'm sorry. But essentially, it's this really interesting thing where I can now understand why everything seems so out of place. Everything seems so wrong with Tristan and his training, his understanding of his powers, and all the volatility behind it. Because just Meliodas didn't want that to be Tristan's life. And it's probably, like, now... I'm still on the Meliodas death train, alright? Like, I need him to die sometime soon. But at the same time, I really want to see this dynamic developed with regular Tristan too. Because obviously this is something that's being brought out because this is just Tristan with no filter, losing his mind. But at the same time, this is obviously something that has existed and has layers to it. And obviously we know Elizabeth isn't the biggest fan of fighting either, so she would probably agree with Meliodas and be like, oh, yeah, we don't need to train Tristan for any of that. We'll protect him. We'll take care of the world. This is what we were made for. This is what we were made to do. He doesn't have to do that. He can live a peaceful life. But his instincts, his very blood, is built for battle. So he's left in this case where he just sees his father as someone who's leaving him out of fights because he views him as inadequate, even though that's totally not the case at all, because he just doesn't fully understand what Meliodas as a person has been through and what his childhood was like and stuff like that. I doubt these two have had long, complicated talks about the demon world. I'm not even sure Tristan's even been there. Has he met Zeldris? I don't know. I'd assume so. I'd hope so. I think... No, the only panel I remember of Zeldris and Gelda was when Elizabeth got pregnant, because they didn't even think that could happen. So there's probably going to be a whole arc about Tristan learning about his past and why he was raised in a certain way that he was, and how that's going to affect the future from here on out. Very, very interesting. If you had to ask me, this is an interesting way to write a main character as a parent. Not just make them a bad, neglectful parent or anything like that. Make them a good parent, but have it so that the nature of the narrative make it seem like they're a bad parent in the eyes of their kid, because this is a battle manga. Because they were not raised for battle and they cannot control it, it makes the parent seem bad in a different way, in a non-traditional bad parent way. I like that. It's a very interesting way that Nakaba decided to take that, and I'm also intrigued to see Lance's dynamic with Bond now. There's so many things I want to see, which is great. I love it. I love how Nakaba has decided to take the series and take its legacy characters, really, with Tristan and Lancelot. I'm very intrigued. And we do get to see that Meliodas is once again acknowledging, like, you can't change back still. This is still a problem that we have to deal with. And we get to see that Tristan is still losing it. He's like, I can do it. He's just losing it all. And assumedly, right, with this level of power, with this darkness coursing through his body, I would attribute it to something like an adrenaline rush on adrenaline rush. Like, the level of power that Tristan's body is emitting right now may be a little bit beyond what he can handle at the moment. I'm assuming this would be the longest time he's been in Demon Mark, and thusly, because of that, he's just growing and growing and growing passively, because the darkness is likely trying to erode away the light inside of him. That's probably why his mind is going a little bit kooky, because he's a two-sided coin, and neither of the sides wants to cooperate. And thusly, the darkness, which is probably overwhelming it right now, is causing him to go crazy. And we get to see that even Arthur, once again, I'm assuming out of his respect for Meliodas, is like, yo, you really are just a child, huh? You understand nothing. Nothing at all. In this battlefield, you're only dragging your father down. And we get to see, the reason I bring up the whole adrenaline on adrenaline thing is you can see that Tristan, despite seemingly raising his power and sparking with more darkness energy, he's breathing heavy, he's sweating. And it's because his body's not made for this just yet. Like, have you ever, in superhuman situations, or in cases where your body's fight or flight is like, oh, we can't run, we must fight, your body will typically shut down the regular limiters it has. Like, you can bite off your own tongue, you can bite off your own thumb, you can lift insane amounts of weight even if you haven't trained, just because the human body is capable of doing it. It's just that your brain, usually subconsciously, is like, yeah, we aren't gonna do that though. We kind of like being in one piece, and not the manga. No, okay. But with that being the case, it leaves it so that if your body ever is put in a situation where those limiters shut off, it'll start destroying itself, because it's like, up, fight or flight. And since Demon Tristan is, his body is screaming fight, it's just going to keep giving him more and more power, shutting off more and more amounts of limiters, and thus destroying his bodily functions. So ultimately, he is causing more and more trouble for himself and more trouble for his father by simply existing there and being unable to revert. And we get to see that Arthur even straight up brings up the facts, like, yo, not gonna lie, if you had stayed out of the way, I would have damaged, no, actually, no, he doesn't say I would have damaged your father far worse. He says I would have been damaged far worse, and your father wouldn't have been damaged at all. Which goes to show that, once again, the relativity between base Mel and base Arthur is kind of crazy right now, you know what I'm saying? Because we're not even talking about Demon Mark. Like, Tristan lunges in and interferes when Mel is still in base. He only goes Demon Mark after he saves Tristan, which is very specific. And with that being the case, we also get to see that Meliodas doesn't heal immediately, which is a problem, because he has this gash on his neck, and he tells Tristan it's nothing to worry about. But at his level of power, that should have healed off pretty much instantaneously. But the fact that it doesn't may mean that Arthur has some sort of regeneration negation, which is not good. With that being the case, we get to see that while Arthur is critiquing Tristan for getting in the way of Meliodas, he's also critiquing Meliodas for getting in the way of Meliodas. He's like, yo, really, Dan? Like, in a national affair like this, you shouldn't really be worrying about your son. You should have to worry about your kingdom right now. And we get to see that Meliodas, once again, a character who's very much focused on the interconnected bonds between people, and who very much despised his father for the focus on just the general power and state of the demons, the general existence of them, why they're so great and powerful and girthy. Like, he hated that. He hated that part of his father. He never wanted to be king. Thusly, he views kingship in a different way. He's like, no, I gotta protect the individuals. I gotta protect my son. It's my son. It's my person that I care about. Why wouldn't I care about him? How can I be the king of the country if I don't? And we see that Arthur just strictly judges him as like, oh, well, if you're going to be so focused on the individual, you are unfit to be king. And honestly, what do you even think it takes to be the king of a country? And ironically enough, you got to realize, in terms of our two kings, yeah, Arthur is more experienced. Like, in terms of just what he does and how he does it, Arthur is the one to have ruled a kingdom much longer than Meliodas has. And thusly, with that being the case, he kind of would know a little bit more about being a king, you know what I'm saying? And thusly, the kingly ideal that Arthur's talking about here is the ability to see the forest and not the trees. The ability to sacrifice few for the sake of the many. And he straight up says it. Resolve in action. In order to protect one's country and its people, one must cast aside their individuality and all their feelings, even if it's your loving wife and son. Don't you think so? And we see as Tristan's body is breaking down further and further and darkness begins to spark out of him, Meliodas lunges to take care of him. And this whole idea of giving away your individuality and only being able to take up resolve in action, very, very, very shady, if you ask me. A little bit confuzzling coming from you, Arthur. Like, I mean, I suppose his whole kingdom was destroyed, so he just views his kingdom as it. But sacrificing your individuality, that's the way to become a king? I feel you need an overwhelming sense of self to be king, rather than no sense of self at all. Interesting. I do understand the disregard of feelings, because sometimes, as a leader, you have to make hard choices. You have to sacrifice the few to save the many. So I could see that part of the argument, but the sacrifice of individuality, once again, makes me believe more and more that it's not entirely Arthur up in there. Like, he has some TFS Kami Piccolo Nail vibes, where he just has multiple voices going on in his head at once. And we get to see that Meliodas just fully disagrees with Arthur. He's like, no, I don't. I don't believe that's what it takes to be king. I believe being a king is taking care of all the people individually. I care about the trees and not the forest. And we see he's even cradling his son, which is, man, it's a sad image, right? Like, Tristan struggling with his power is very, very interesting. And we see that with this, Arthur's very presence is still just overwhelming. Like, he's still triggering Tristan to release more and more power in an attempt to fight him. And you can even see it as he screams and breaks free of his father's hold. The demon mark itself is growing further and further down his face. He's becoming more and more animalistic. And we see Meliodas still tries to cradle his son, right? He still... See, this is unbelievably sad too, right? Because all Meliodas sees here, in multiple levels, is his baby. Like, 16 years to Meliodas is, let me just do some quick math, right? Meliodas has been alive on the lowest, let's say, for 4,000 years, divided by 16. He has lived over 250 of Tristan's current lifespan. He just sees a baby. That's all Tristan is to him, his baby. And you see, and like, I personally, I am not a parent, but I feel like my paternal instincts woke up a long time ago, where, like, if I see something younger than me in pain, I'm like, no. And that's what Meliodas is dealing with. This is his son. This is his child, screaming in pain and agony because they can't control themselves. So, of course, as a father, he cares about that first and foremost. He loves his kid, and he's going to do everything, even expose his back to his enemy, to try and take care of his son. And oh, that's just good character writing, bro. That's good character writing, man. I can't stress it enough. Nakaba, no matter how many issues I have with him on different stuff, man, can he write some characters. Man, can he write some character conflict. Man, do I love it. And we see that Arthur, once again, he doesn't care. He's merciless right now. He's like, all right, then die, protecting your beloved son. And the chapter ends with Meliodas trying to restrain Tristan, trying to get him to force himself back into base, and Arthur just swinging his blade. We don't know what it's going to do. I'm not sure. I can't see Meliodas' neck too clearly. I'm not sure if he's still bleeding from there. Let me see. Can I see it in any of the other shots? It's specifically on a side of his neck that we just don't see. So maybe he's healed up from it. I'm not sure. But if Arthur really does get a full free slice of Meliodas' back, and he does have an anti-healing property, that's not going to be good. However, the thing is, like, the flavor text at the end of the chapter, and I'm not sure what it means, right? Because it says, Meliodas protects Tristan from Arthur's blade. As expected, his welfare is bad, hurt, I don't know. He's probably going to be in pain. But then again, the next chapter is called Hyperion. And I couldn't find anything about Hyperion other than the child of Uranus and Gaia, like from Greek mythology. That's all I could get. And we see that apparently through the resolve of a great father, next time the tides of war turn. I'm not sure this is going to turn in Meliodas' favor. If it turns in Meliodas' favor, I'm going to assume he's going to enter like assault mode or something to block the blade and then like truly start taking Arthur seriously while trying to comfort Tristan, and or Meliodas dies or takes extreme damage and gets written out of the narrative. Either way, interesting. Very, very interesting. Overall, this chapter, another 10 out of 10 chapter. Nakaba has just been peeking it out recently. Like, he's been dropping nothing but heat. The character conflict that's been established here between Arthur and Meliodas is amazing. Obviously, seeing the two fight is great. Seeing the confirmation and 100% affirmation in Arthur's beliefs is great. Really establishes him as a true villain, a true antagonist that we are going to have to deal with, because he is so set in his ways that his idol cannot even snap him out of it. So there's no way our main cast is going to be able to snap him out of it. To see Meliodas still be in his prime, still be a demon worth fighting for, someone with the power to still challenge Arthur somewhat even in base, is great. Seeing the return of Trillian Dark is great. Seeing the conflict that's being set up with Tristan in terms of his power and how far that journey is going to have to go before he gets control over it. Seeing the fact of what's like, seeing the journey that we're going to have to go with Tristan and Meliodas if Meliodas survives, and the sheer implied history of what's going on with Meliodas and the reasoning we could hypothetically have for why Tristan has no control over this power. Great. And obviously the ending of the chapter leaves us in an even more chaotic spot than the last. This is Meliodas bearing his back to Arthur. We are in a real 50-50 right now, where Meliodas could take the fight on evermore or die. And that's interesting. However, those are my thoughts. Please tell me your thoughts in the comment section down below. Thank you guys so much for watching. Please remember to like, share, comment, and subscribe. Make sure the little notification bell so you miss out on any videos that come to the channel. Thank you guys so much for watching once again, and I hope you guys have a wonderful day. This is That Guy with the Pencil, writing off.